Hey everyone, welcome back to She Burbs Podcast. I am your host, Brooke Wright. Hey everyone, welcome back to She Burbs Podcast. Today's guest is Hollywood Capone. Hi Hollywood.
Hi, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being a guest today. So can you tell our listeners what inspired your book, The Ashes?
It's a story from my heart, more or less. It's about a friend of mine, or it's mostly about a friend of mine that passed away suddenly. Somebody that I've known, most of my life. We had met in the 5th grade and became fabulous friends. And, our lives after that became intertwined. My parents knew him. His mother was my math teacher in school. And we grew up in the same town, and we just, we were just always best friends. We go camping together and, do things around town together, get in trouble together. And, we grew up and, we did different things in life. He became a lawyer. I moved to California, but we were always, very close, either on the phone or even when I moved back from California. We were, personal best buddies. And it was just it was a sudden thing for me. I never pictured my life without my friend in it, because he'd always been there, even after other people in my life had passed on. It was like a foundation of my life. And when he passed on, I had some trouble dealing with it, and writing the book kind of helped me through that.
Yeah, definitely. So if you don't mind, can you tell us the story if you want to?
Sure. I mean, it was the story of him passing is a pretty simple story. There's really not much to it. It's he had to hang a piece of molding on the outside of his grandmother's house, and rigged up this series of ladders to climb to the upper roof, and got up there and slipped and fell and came crashing down onto the concrete. And that was the end of my dear friend. But the book is kind of a different story. I tell the book in 2 ways. The story goes back and forth between fiction and nonfiction, and I tell the story, his passing and my visits to the hospital where he was in a coma, and my dad came with me a couple times to the hospital, and I tell that story, which is the nonfiction side of it. But the other side of the story, I kind of told this backstory of that whole episode fictionally, because it has to do with how it all resolved in the end. When it finally resolved in the end, he passed away, and there was no. His family decided to be very quiet with it. They had no memorial. There's no gravesite. They had him cremated. It was just like he disappeared. And the reason I wrote the story the way I did is because I felt in my heart that my friend had just disappeared, and that was the most troubling thing about it for me. I had a real hard time dealing with that.
How did you cope with your friend passing? Because I know with me, with death, I don't cope very well with death, and it takes me a long while.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm still affected by it now. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you, but if I really got down into the weeds, I would get really choked up and have a hard time with it, because he's just, yeah, man. Sometimes he's one of those people. He wasn't a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination. He was seriously flawed, but he had this look towards life that was really based in reality. He was friends to everybody. It didn't matter what color you were, what religion you were. He would just come up and be like, "Hey, how you doing?" and it was just, that was his nature, and I love that part of him, because I both admired it and I was jealous of it, because I'm not quite that way. Sometimes I'm standoffish. I don't go into certain crowds because maybe it's not my crowd, or I'd feel uncomfortable in that group of people, whatever. But Alan, he would just jump right in there, and he had the gift of gab, and he would start doing his thing, and I'd sit back from a distance watching. I'm like, how does he do that? And in hindsight, looking back now that he's gone, I think the world's missing out on something. It's a shame he's not there, because he was just an interesting character in this interesting world.
Yeah, he sounds like one that can make like the room light up like whenever he's there, then he'll just talk to everybody.
Yeah.
Like that's what people say about me, but I'm like, how? How so? Like I don't think I do that, but people think I do. They're like, "Oh, you're so cool with everybody." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
It's a gift. It really is. You have that gift.
Yeah, definitely. So can you tell us what the title means? Like why did you pick that title?
Well, the ashes is basically what happened to him in the end.
Mhm.
In the end, he was cremated, and there was no memorial. There was no end. There was no nothing. It was just
Mhm.
poof. He was gone. And so I tell the story of that in a fictional sense. In the book, uh, he eventually is consumed by this evil snake of fire,
Mhm.
and then after this whole whirlwind of you know uh, despair and torment ends, all that's left is this pile of ashes, and that's sometimes I feel like that's what I got out of it. It's
Mhm.
in the end of through my whole life and these interesting times that we've had together, and just these crazy things where so I couldn't put together a story like the one that he and I lived together. In
Mhm.
the end, it just turned into dust in the wind.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like you didn't get closure with him? Like you didn't get like your last goodbye or something? Like,
Every day, every day. Yeah, my son knew him too.
oh.
Because we were just that intertwined. And my son's older now; he's 24. And sometimes like you see things on the news that are crazy or whatever, right? And I'd get a text out of the blue from my son, and it'd be a text like I'd look down at my phone and it would say something like, "What do you think Alan would say about this?" Because Alan had something to say about everything. Good, bad, or ugly. It's just, and coming from my son, sometimes it just cracks me up. I'm just like, oh my god, what he would say about this would just it would be epic.
That's funny. So, what does your family and Alan's family think about the book you wrote? Like, have they read it or any
I
input?
I I don't know what his parents think about it. Oh, excuse
Mhm.
me, but his father passed away about a month after he passed away,
Oh, wow.
and that was really sad too because
Mhm.
I mean one side of me you know thinks that it was just a lot for him to overcome,
Mhm.
and the other side of me, thinks maybe he was sick for a while and nobody really knew it. I don't really know the details about it because they're very, I mean, like you said, earlier about your mom, not very like touchy feely.
Mhm.
These aren't very touchy feely people.
Mhm.
They're very, I mean, they're wonderful people. They're
Mhm.
kind people. They've always been gracious to me, but they're not very touchy feely. And
Mhm.
so I don't really know what his parents would have thought about it, but I know Alan's brother read it, and he said some nice things to me about it, and so I'm okay with that. That was good enough for me.
Nice. That's sweet. So can you give our listeners like a brief summary of the book if you want to? You don't have
Sure,
to.
sure. I mean, well, yeah,
Yeah. Can you
it's
share
called
that?
The Ashes. That's my buddy on the cover, and
Oh.
then that's me on the back. And a friend of mine took that photograph. It's like one of the only photographs of me that I like, so that's why it wound up on there. Um, but the book starts off with me kind of meandering in a daydream, and as that daydream unfolds, it takes the reader, to the days in the hospital right after the accident,
Mhm.
and that lasted for about 2 weeks. He was in the hospital for about 2 weeks, and until it got down to the nitty gritty when they, were fairly confident that there was really going to be no hope for him.
Mhm.
And so I write that story of some of the visits, and a couple of the visits in particular. My father had come along with me.
Mhm.
And then obviously the last day in the hospital, which was chilling for me because I went to visit him. The last time I went to visit him, he had passed about 5 minutes before I got there,
Wow.
so he was still in the room in the bed, and they had him upright on the bed, and my father and I walked in, and his parents were in there, and it was just this crazy scene of talking to his parents about
Mhm.
all kinds of different things, and and
Mhm.
and he was just propped up on the bed, and it's something that I'll never forget as long as I live.
Yeah. Oh, you make me cry. Like, so I don't know what to say after that because Wow. So I've never seen like a dead body before. So I'm just like, so what was your emotions that when you saw that? Like, was you crying or like, I don't know. Like, I would be freaking out. I
I,
don't
I, I was speechless. My father started talking to Alan's father, and they were having a conversation about, you know, why he would set the ladder up that way and what the
Yeah.
weather was like and all kinds of things. And all the while in my head, I was just trying to figure out a way to get out of there.
Yeah.
How do I get out of here without just turning and running? You
Yeah.
know, because these people clearly are in distress too.
Mhm.
I didn't want to add to their misery because they're
Mhm.
sitting there in this room with their deceased son, and I can only imagine how they were torn up on the inside.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there, and I had this crazy thought of like flies flying around the room, and I wrote this in the book, and I tell a story about that. It was just, and what the flies were really was just um, thoughts inside my head. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And as I was sitting there in the room with this weird conversation going on, I was trying to just pick one thought to
Mhm.
say something, to say anything, and for it seemed like an eternity. Maybe it was only a minute or two. I don't know, but I
Yeah.
couldn't think of anything to say, and it was
Wow.
in the moment it was troubling for me. But it when I wrote the book, it helped me tell the story because there was a way to tell that.
Yeah, that's sweet. So I do have a question for you. So have you ever thought about like journaling? Like, you know how some people journal and they talk to God in their journals, like dear God, blah blah blah. Or have you ever thought about doing that for your friend Alan, like dear Alan, and then turning it into a book, like just talking to him, like telling him about your day and stuff like that? Like, have you ever thought about that, like to help you
Well,
cope?
well, in a way, that's kind of how this book started because
Mhm.
you know it, the book I started writing it. I had no intention to write a book.
Mhm.
How it started was I was having some real difficulty dealing with all of the stuff that was going on.
Mhm.
I was just floored,
Mhm.
and so I wrote a paragraph just to write a paragraph so that I could look at the words and see what they looked like to
Right.
tell myself how I was feeling about what had happened.
Right.
And that paragraph turned into a second paragraph, which
Oh
turned
wow.
into a third paragraph, which turned into a chapter, which turned into another chapter, and then next thing I know, 17 chapters later, I got a little story on my hands, and
Wow.
towards the end of it,
Mhm.
and I don't know how this is going to sound, but this is the way I felt at the end of it. At the end of it, I couldn't wait for the story to end, and
Mhm.
it's not like I was trying to force the ending because with this story, I was just kind of along for the ride. It was really writing itself, and I was just I was troubled by it, and I really wanted it to end. I just wanted to get the story finished, and then when it resolved and it finished on its own,
Mhm.
I was grateful that it was over, and that was the closure for me. That was
Mhm.
the closing the book and turning the final page on it, and I was content at that point. I said, "You're right. I've done everything I could possibly do. There's nothing else I can do," and
Yeah,
and I felt good about at least completing it.
that's great. So we can purchase your book on Amazon, correct? Like,
Yes, it's on Amazon, and there's an audiobook version I finished too, and
oh,
that's up on Audible.
nice. So did you read the book on Audible,
Oh,
or did
oh
somebody else?
no, I did it myself, and it was the hardest thing I ever did. Right, so writing the book and publishing it took me 9 months or so. Right,
Mhm.
and towards the end, once I had finished the book, I had to proofread it.
Mhm.
I had to format it for paperback. I mean, there was some cover design, some clerical things that needed to happen, and I got through that because I'd never written a book before. This was all new to me, and
Mhm.
so I got all through that, and I got it published, and I was grateful. And then at some point shortly after that, I was like, oh well, now I'm going to record the audiobook, and I'll record it, and I'll sell lots of copies, and it'll be great.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out that way
What? Why?
because it was so difficult. Like
Mhm.
I hear my voice, and my voice, at least, pre-book, I didn't really have any knowledge of how to enunciate or to make what I'm
Oh.
saying sound interesting
Mhm.
or clear. And a lot of times when we write,
Mhm.
we don't write to say the words out loud. So there were so many phrases in this book where these words are strung together, and there's no human way to say these words and make them sound well, because the consonants bounce off each other. There were so many things about it that, I'd get tongue tied, and it took me 9 months to record the audiobook and get it to the point where I was like, okay, now I'm comfortable that I could put this out there. But that was harder than all of it combined, the audiobook.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Like, I've interviewed quite a few people that read for audio books, and they're like, yeah, it does take a while. So, oh my God.
Yeah.
So aside from the book question, I mean the ashes questions, are you working on any other books, or was that just your only book?
No, I'm very deep. I'm 30,000 words deep into my follow up right now, which uh, I I was so married to the ashes that
Mhm.
when I started writing the second book, I wanted to get away from it. I didn't want it to have really anything to do with it. But in a sense, because of what was going on in my world, and the frame of mind I was in, and the tone that my life had at that point, um, a lot of it started to creep in there. There was some little things that I kind of wanted to just extrapolate on. And not that it's a sequel to it, or anything like that, but there's some little subtle things and some not so subtle things that I've taken and I've put in the next book. Like my friend Alan, for instance, I brought him back in my next book because I miss him a lot and I want him around, and he's just a great partner to have in life, and I'm not ready to let go of him. So I made him, the main character's partner in my second book, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. And he's a fun character, and he's the same guy, only he's very young. He's like 17, and I'm just having a blast with it.
That's cool. So you made the partner in the next book like his personality, like how
I
he was and everything. That's
Exactly,
cool.
and
That's
because the thing with Alan is Alan always had an inside track to everything,
cool.
and so even in school, like if like some kids get in trouble in school, and Alan happens to be involved in it. His mother was a teacher, and he knew the guidance counselors, and he always had a way of like, well, see you guys later, and we would be in detention, and he wouldn't, and God bless him for that.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for coming on my podcast today and chatting with me.
I want to thank you for having me. I mean, I appreciate it. I can't tell you how much.
You have a great day.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, I want to thank you all so much for listening to my interview with Hollywood Capone. So if you would like to purchase his book, like he said, you can go on Amazon. I've got the Amazon page up here. So you just go and look up The Ashes, a fictional recollection regarding the death of my best friend. And they have it on Kindle edition for $5.99. But okay, I'm trying to find it to where see how much the paperback is. Well, you can just go in there, and he has it in audiobook style, and then he has it in paperback. So the paperback is $9.99. So you can just go on there and purchase it on Amazon. And I hope you all check out his book, and I hope y'all have a great day and make great choices. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day. Bye.